Good morning. On this nice sunny morning and the last week of National Indigenous History Month. With that, I'd like to say the Municipality of Jasper respectfully acknowledges the Jasper National Park and the Municipality of Jasper on the Treaty 6 and Treaty 8 territories, as well as Métis Nation 4. This land is the traditional territory, meeting ground, gathering place, traveling route, and home for the Dinéza, the Hewok, Anishinaabe, Secwepemc, Stoney Nakoda, and Métis. Has everyone had an opportunity to look at the agenda? Are there any additions? Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Just with respect to agenda item 11, we will be moving in camera to discuss a personnel matter. I would like to add to that a legal matter also under court.
Thank you. Is there any other additions? Okay, is there a councillor willing to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Keller-Harrington, all in favor? Approved. We have the minutes of the Committee of the Whole approved on June 20th. Is there any business arising from those minutes? We move on to delegations, and I see none. Correspondence. Oh. On to new business then. We have 7.1, the Municipally Controlled Corporation Governance and Business Plan. Good morning, CAO.
Good morning, Deputy Mayor Waxer, Council. Apologies, I'm away at the Local Government Administrators of Alberta conference, but I'm happy to be able to be here remotely. I'm joined in the room by our new Municipal Housing Coordinator, Leanne Pelletier. So Leanne's there in person, and I'll be supporting the Council discussion with our team of consultants on this item. We're here today, Council, as a result of work that I'm sure you're all well aware of, that started with a governance review of the JCHC Corporation quite some time ago. Since then, we've been working with Collier's project leaders and Brownlee Law to develop recommendations regarding the structure of JCHC in order to facilitate transitioning debt from the municipality outside of the municipal debt limits onto the corporation, as well as an opportunity to attract private investment for the purpose of building community housing. Our team of consultants have been hard at work, and we're here today to present that work to you. And I just want to be clear about the purpose of what we're asking for from you today. We are looking to present the draft business plan to Council to receive your feedback and a confirmation of whether you believe it's ready to go to a public hearing process where we would be able to receive comment from the public. That is a formalized step that's required under the Municipal Government Act in order to establish a municipally controlled corporation. And so the nuance here is we're happy to receive feedback on the business plan. If there are major areas of concern and you don't think it's ready to go to that sort of public comment, public hearing opportunity, then we should know that now. But we're also not asking you to decide on all of the specifics of the corporation. And in fact, we're not asking you to decide whether you want to set up a municipally controlled corporation. That's a decision that needs to come in the context of a properly advertised public hearing. So for today, we want to ensure that you see the draft business plan, the concept, the way things are heading, to get your input of whether there are any major considerations that need to be addressed. And if you think that we are headed the right direction and this is worthy of taking to a public hearing, then that's the motions that we're looking to receive from you. I would like to introduce Chet Shaw and Jake Dean from Collier's Project Leaders. They've been handling the development of the business plan and financials. I believe we're also joined today by our representative from Brownlee Law. John is here. I'm going to turn it over to the project team to guide you through the business plan. There is a significant amount of detail in there, but Chad and Jake assure me that they, will be able to present that in a way that's accessible to council and understandable for the general public. We want to ensure that we give you a good sense of what the intent is and how the structure will work. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our Colliers team. Chad?
Thanks, Bill. First of all, I'd first like to say I really appreciate the opportunity for us to be here, and we really enjoyed working on this, and we're really excited about the initiative. Jake, if you can go to the next slide, maybe we could just start with reiterating some of the things that Bill had said. The next one, please. And so our mandate started a few months ago, and it was under the premise of, could you help us think about the structure of what a municipally controlled corporation would look like, how it would work financially, and some of the key kind of governance and structural elements that would guide it. Having said that, that work stream was born out of years and years of work prior to that, that first started with kind of the recognition of a housing shortfall in Jasper, both in terms of accessibility and options. It was also, very evident through the analysis that we did independently, but also through conversations with both member businesses in the community as well as staff, that this housing shortage was really hindering some of the economic development within Jasper. And since it's become a strategic priority for council to address this. So a number of years ago, as I mentioned, this work has been ongoing for a number of years, but a number of years ago in 2007, the Jasper Community Housing Corporation was established in order to begin to address some of the affordable housing challenges in a more structured way. A number of years later, and last year, our first engagement with Bill and team was to complete a governance review. And in doing so, we identified ways in which to improve and expand the supply of housing. And this work came out with a number of recommendations, one of which was to explore the development of a municipally controlled corporation as a mechanism for Jasper to be more involved directly in the development of housing options and affordability within the community. Check next slide. So, this kind of shows our work plan and some of the steps that we followed. We don't necessarily have to get into steps 1 and 2 because that's, some of the iterative process that we went through, but we did do a lot of comprehensive engagement with the community, as well as some pretty detailed financial and legal analysis to come to our conclusions today. And we're now at the last step, the culmination of our work for your comment and input, which is the draft municipally controlled corporation business plan. Next step, please. Next one. So as I alluded to, the JCHC had some pretty clear priorities and objectives, and that was to consider ways in which to improve housing affordability and accessibility in the community. What the municipally controlled corporation would allow us to do is build on some of those foundations that were established in 2007. We're calling the municipally controlled corporation the JMHC. That's the acronym, the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation. And specifically, the 3 additional abilities that a municipally controlled corporation would allow us to do is 1, partner with the private sector. 2nd, take a direct interest in financing and constructing new housing. And 3rd, be the owner and operator of existing assets that currently are being managed by staff at Jasper. Next slide, please, Jake. So in terms of what a governance structure for a municipally controlled corporation would look like, it is very similar to what the JCHC deploys currently, where council is the primary shareholder, the municipality is the primary shareholder of the organization. And within the organization, they would have a board of directors and an appointed officer, a CEO, or in the case of the JCHC, it's Bill as the CAO. The municipally controlled corporation would also have a number of contracted services. So services that would be required for operation of the municipally controlled corporation, but that would be paid for separately and not housed internally as full-time staff. So a couple of them, as Bill mentioned earlier, would be a housing coordinator to manage both tenancy, but also the existing stock of assets. In the future, it could also involve, being a coordinator between people in the community who are looking for different housing options and availability, as well as other internal support services like IT, human resources, and office space. The municipally controlled corporation also contract property management services for the developments that it would build. Next slide, please, Jake. Now, this is a really in-depth, complicated slide with a lot of numbers. So I will try and point you to the key line items that I think would be meriting of some conversation, and happy to stop at any point for questions as they come up. This is a high-level snapshot of what we think the municipally controlled corporation's cash flow would look like over its first 8 years of operation. So at the top, you kind of see the net revenue from the proposed Connaught development, going from 2025 at the time it would be finished to 2031. We've only taken 8 years, but we've done the analysis out for 40 years. The next line is the revenue of the existing assets. So there are 3 assets currently, 2 housing assets and the medical clinic that would be rolled into the municipally controlled corporation. And then the next line item is the MOJ subsidy, which is currently the existing assets, the 2 housing units as well as the medical building, are running at a cash flow negative on an annual basis, and there would be a subsidy required on an ongoing basis to kind of maintain the rents that are currently being charged for those. Fourth is the compliance deposit. So this is the amount that we would be required to pay towards Park Canada until completion of the asset. It's a fairly standard deposit that is fully refundable with interest upon completion. So you see that as a cash flow positive item, and then you see it as a cash flow negative item all the way under the expenses at the bottom. The difference in the 2 numbers is just the interest rate. We've assumed that Parks Canada would pay a 3% interest rate, whereas our borrowing assumes a 5% interest rate on the debt to borrow for the deposit initially. Jumping into the expense lines, we have the operating expenses for the 3 assets, as I mentioned. If you see, the expenses are higher than the revenues of the assets, as I mentioned. So that is the requirement for the subsidy. And then the 2 lines below that, the repayment on the debenture. We have assumed that in order to fund the Connaught project, that the municipality would take out a $5 million debenture, and the payments there represent payments towards principal and interest to service that debenture over a 25-year amortization period for the $5 million. So one of the key things I would like to point us to here is the box in gray at the bottom, the annual cash flow total, as well as the cash balance. As you can see, the municipally controlled corporation, per our modeling, does not become cash flow positive until 2031. This is due to a number of reasons, mostly due to the fact that the rents of the Connaught project would successively increase over the years, and as they increase, pay for the repayment of debt as well as the principal, which is a fixed amount, and eventually would cover the OPEX of the 3 transferred assets. Having said that, one of the things that we would like to also point out is that while the municipally controlled corporation would be cash flow negative for a few years as the development is gaining, as the development is gaining momentum in terms of revenue, the municipally controlled corporation will always remain cash positive. So there will always be enough cash in the bank to service all of its negative cash flow outputs. So I guess the next section we're going to get into is a little bit of a deep dive on the Connaught Drive project in specific. But before we do that, I will pause and ask for questions and comments if there are any.
Councillor Melvin.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I wonder if we might come back to the MOJ subsidy and just maybe a little bit more of an explanation of what that subsidy is, consists of, the purpose of it. It does maintain the cash balance, positive cash balance, because of the influx of the $83,000 to $99,000 over the course of 7 years. But is that to subsidize the rent that we would be charging our own municipal employees, or is our rent calculated in the net revenue of the Connaught project?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I'm going to start with a bit of a reference point of where this exists in our budget today, and then I'll ask Chet and Jake to speak to the details of what shows up in the business plan. But this cost or this expense is currently contained in the municipal operating budget in a bunch of spots. And this is a summary of the operating expense of those assets. And while it isn't a directly identified line item in the municipal operating budget, the fact is that the rent that we're charging at Cottage Clinic, the medical clinic, and the rents that we're charging at the properties, the duplex and the house, are not reflective of the total operating costs, inclusive of capital improvements and everything else on those properties. So today, the municipality is subsidizing those properties to the extent that you see, pretty much what you would see as the total of the 2024 subsidy. So that subsidy exists in the municipal operating budget today. This is a reflection of the transfer of that ongoing expense to the municipally controlled corporation. And that's something that if council directed, that the Cottage Clinic rent should be more reflective of actual operating cost or market value, and same for the properties that we use for municipal staff accommodation, that subsidy could be reduced. It would mean that the rents would have to be increased to be more reflective of the actual operating costs. So to be clear, this is not a change that is happening because of the municipally controlled corporation. It is more transparent because we have actually captured it from a bunch of different line items within the municipal budget and summarized it so council can more clearly see what the, in essence, the operating loss of the municipally owned properties is. And maybe, Chet, I'll pass to you maybe just to speak to the detail of what's in there, because I know there's actually a number of line items that you had to scrub through our municipal budget to find the true operating costs of those properties.
Yeah, and so before we do that, one of the things that I will also clarify, and I apologize for not doing so, is that the Connaught project in isolation, when it enters operation in 2020, end of 2025, will be cash flow positive by itself in infinitum. It the revenues charged, the rents charged for the Connaught Drive project are strong enough to cover all of its operating costs. Jake, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the specific line items in the MOJ subsidy, but they are generally capsulated in each specific assets, the three assets, the existing assets, cash flow statement under what is called, transfer to restricted funds. And Jake, I don't know if you have some specifics around that.
Yeah, I have it all up. I mean, the purpose of the MOJ subsidy is just to net out any cost that would be transferred to the JMHC. Included in the MOJ subsidy, outside of the revenues from rent, are contracted and general services, insurance costs, taxes, materials, goods and supplies, transfer to restricted funds, which is for the JCHC as they have the restricted funds, and the reallocation of mountain costs, which is for property maintenance. So those are the main line items included within the subsidy. The subsidy doesn't take into account the rent though, so the rent's a separate line item.
And so those are all items that currently exist in the municipal budget. They just aren't assembled in a way that is as concise and transparent as this. And the purpose of those costs and those assets coming over to the JMHC is something that we'll discuss, I think, a little bit later on in the presentation, because it essentially provides the opportunity for the corporation to leverage those assets and borrow against them in a way that the municipality doesn't or wouldn't be able to do. Does that answer your question, Councillor Melnick?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Before we go to the next slide, one of the other points that I think is important to make is if you look at the top line item there that says net revenue of Connaught 100% into JMHC. This line item is the net of all of the revenues and costs on an annual basis that the Connaught Drive project in isolation creates. We have assumed that all of the net revenues of that project flow back directly to the JMHC and are not distributed equally amongst all shareholders, as the intent of the net revenues are to continuously fund and possibly invest in future projects under the discretion of council and staff. Jake, I'll turn it over to you for the next couple of slides.
Thank you. Before you move on, I believe there were a couple of other questions yet at the table.
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. And just returning to that slide that's on the screen and carrying on with the question from Councillor Melnick and recognizing Mr. Gibbons' last response, maybe this is something that is better dealt with later in the presentation. My concern, though, is that the intent is to transfer the existing revenue generating properties to the JMHC, so the three rental properties. So those will be divested from the municipality and go to the JMHC, except not the liability part. So right now there's a subsidy that supports those assets. So the new corporation gets the asset, but it appears with the subsidy that the municipality keeps recording that essentially as a liability. And I struggle with how that squares with the requirement that's mentioned in the request for decision that's before council, that says one of the obligations when we submit documents is to provide information that the municipally controlled corporation is not dependent on its shareholders for operations. Now, maybe that just means actual operations, but if the operation is funded by the only shareholder, how do we overcome that challenge that the MCC is, I think, financially absolutely dependent on its only shareholder?
Your Worship, I can speak to that, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I think the MOJ subsidy could maybe be differently titled because this is reflective of a policy choice that council has available to them. If council wished the corporation to run those assets at a revenue neutral position, or maybe to say it a different way, at a full cost recovery position, that is completely possible. And this could be, there wouldn't be a requirement for an MOJ subsidy. What you may see is requests from employees living in municipal staff accommodation to subsidize their rent, and from the cottage clinic operators, the medical operation there, to subsidize their rent, because the rents that the municipality is currently charging at all three of those properties do not reflect full cost recovery. So this line could disappear. The subsidy could disappear, but the revenue line item would have to increase. And the implication of that revenue line item increase would mean that the expense to the operation of cottage clinic and the expense to the staff of living in staff accommodation would have to increase. So this is intended to be full cost recovery. I think the municipality, I think notionally has wanted to do that, but I think that we should also acknowledge that the reason the cottage clinic got built was not to make money. It was to ensure that there is space for medical practitioners in the community. I assume it was. That's obviously well before my time. But this MOJ subsidy is a reflection that the municipality has invested in these properties in keeping them at less than market value and less than full operating cost in order to achieve other policy goals. If we transferred those assets to the corporation and we wanted the corporation to run them as a corporation would at full cost recovery, then the implication of that is that rents would increase. The municipality could separately subsidize the users rather than subsidizing the properties, and I think that that's what we're doing right now, is we're subsidizing the properties, and council could choose to subsidize the users of those properties rather than it, and the assets and the operation of those assets would be at full cost recovery in the MCC's financials.
If I may, then just for my own clarity, I can appreciate that we could change the wording. If it remains as it is, showing a municipal subsidy to the municipally controlled corporation, it certainly looks to me that is a critical component of the success of the corporation. And so, do we run afoul of that rule that says we have to demonstrate that the MCC is not dependent on the shareholder?
That may be a question. I don't know if Chad or Jake would like to answer that one. It may also be a question for John McDonald if he is online. I'm not sure that he is yet. But Your Worship, I think the other thing that we can do is if we reflected that this is a MOJ operate, it is a expense that the MOJ has in return for the JMHC managing its properties, right? Like you are paying to have these three properties managed by the the municipally controlled corporation, and you are doing it in a way that reduces the cost of the front end users. If council or some future council decided that they didn't want to pay that full amount, then obviously the cost would be borne by the end users. John, did you want to comment at all on whether this sort of contravenes that need to show independence or financial independence from the shareholder?
Yes, no, Bill, thanks for that. Bill, I couldn't have stated it any better the way you just said it just now. That's exactly it. I don't see any problems whatsoever with structuring it this way. Now, perhaps the wording of calling it a subsidy might be, we can just change the wording of that. But the fact remains that, that this is, MLJ property that is operating by the JMHC. And that it's done at a bit of a cost, and that, there can be a policy choice to increase the rents on that, and that's fine. So I don't see a problem with that, the way it's structured. And I know I'm just repeating what you said, Bill, but your take on that is exactly correct. As the lawyer advising, MLJ on this, I don't see an issue with this structure. maybe change the word subsidy, but again, just changing it, like I'm not trying to get around a technicality, but this is not a problem here. This, the rule that the MCCs generally have to be cash flow positive, deal more, it's intended for a policy goal to make sure utility operations are going to be operating on a cost recovery basis. So, I say this because we advised Municipal Affairs when they made the rule on the MCCs. So this is not a problem. I don't have an issue with that. I think Bill's explanation works perfectly.
Councillor Demoda.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a direct question to anyone yet, but if I do, it's probably going to be towards Mr. Given. Just maybe some of these concerns will get addressed throughout the document. But, I see that we operate technically at a loss because of whatever type of relief we're going to semantically attribute. So what the actual process is. When we say the idea, or we need to be in a cash flow positive position, or it will be, I'm assuming that that's coming from taxpayer dollars. So when we look at our existing assets and leveraging those, I understand optically that, if we're going to tax people for properties in our community, things like a clinic and municipal housing, optically have a direct benefit to the stakeholders in the community, residents and businesses. But then when we're going into a housing project, optically, when we're looking at that, do I want my taxpayer dollars going towards, providing housing for another business or somebody else? So there's different things in there. Also, just operationally, like in a business plan, I'm not sure that I saw concretely what the operating dollars will be for that facility, and nor is there anything that I found that addresses the off-site levies and how much that'll cost and how that works in the whole process. So hopefully some of that will come out in the conversation. If anyone has the ability or want to address that at this point, that's fine. I don't have a direct question right now. Those are just some of the concerns that I would want to air.
Deputy Mayor Waxhaw, I'll take at least one part of that. I think as we get through some of the more detailed discussion on the business plan, and Chet and Jake can sort of point our attention where we need to. But what I would really just want to bring into sharp relief for council and for the public that are watching, the bottom line of the Connaught project of building a 40-unit apartment building is the top line of this chart. And you can see that at the top line of this chart, that project generates in 2025 $330,000 profit. And Chet and Jake can speak to that. And so you can see that it is not just it is cash flow positive. The Connaught apartment building itself is cash flow positive from day one. The overall municipally controlled corporation, and you're going to see in 2 slides here how the corporation relates to the project, because they're not the same thing. But the overall corporation is taking on those assets that the municipality is currently subsidizing, and there's an assumption that the municipality will continue to subsidize those. That's a policy choice that could end, as we discussed. But for 100% clarity, the business plan that's presented here shows that the Connaught apartment building is a positive cash flow project, and that's represented on the top line there, because all of its profits, quote unquote profits, are returned to its to the mothership, I guess, of the MCC, of the JMHC Corporation, and that's what you're seeing reflected in that top line. So just to give council that confidence, because we don't want anybody to think that we're going to build an apartment building that's going to operate at a loss, or that's going to require ongoing taxpayer subsidy, because that is not the case. The taxpayers of Alberta have subsidized the cost and are reducing the cost of that project to make it financially viable through their $6.5 million Alberta grant. And that's lowered the cost of construction. The fact that the municipality can borrow at very competitive rates, and then that borrowing will be transferred over, is another benefit that makes this financially viable. And then finally, the fact that we and the business plan, we can discuss this in greater detail. Because there's public ownership of the project, we predict, and past history shows, that parks will likely be able to release the land at less than market value. And that also adds to the financial sustainability of the apartment project itself. So those taxpayer subsidies, reduced land value, grants, and the low borrowing from the municipality that ends up, being paid for by the project, all of those things together are the only expected subsidy from the general tax base or from Albertans towards the operation of the apartment building itself. There is not an expectation of ongoing subsidy from the municipal tax rolls into the apartment building.
Well, I really appreciate that clarification. So when we say net revenue of Connaught, that means net profit, clearing all expenses. All right, that's great. And once again, very clear in the answer. Appreciate it.
Are there other questions? Seeing none, I have one quick question. On the JMHC organizational structure chart, under board of directors, it says elected by mayor and council, and I would have been, or would have known what it meant if it said appointed by, but elected by would confuse me.
I think the terms are interchangeable, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I think nominally there would be elections to a board of directors at a shareholders meeting, but the fact that there's only one shareholder that controls all of the shares means that in essence it is mayor and council that would set the criteria for which somebody could be a board member, and that's flexible and up to council. I mean, you could choose to have it have the same composition as the current JCHC. You could choose to have it have some different composition. You could look for different skills that you would want to add to the board and incorporate those. But the fact is that mayor and council, as the single shareholder, get to vote their shares to vote for whichever directors they would like to see on the board. And so technically there's an election, that's probably the technical term, but for intents and purposes, they are chosen and appointed by council and under conditions that are set by council.
Thank you for the clarification, and I believe Councillor DeMota has one more question.
Yeah, it's just more of a clerical thing, and there might be a computer somewhere that doesn't like a Y. But throughout the documents, including the recommendation, major shows up instead of mayor. And I know we have a major mayor in our community and in the province, as far as I'm concerned. But just throughout the document and even in the recommendation that's there. And then just also one little grammatical error at the end of the actual business plan. The director of finance's last name needs to be cleaned up. Just correct it a little bit, but those are just like the peripheral semantic layers there. Grammatical. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor DeMota. We'll make sure to tidy those up as we head towards the public hearing. Thanks for flagging those.
Thank you.
I think we're ready for you to continue then. Thank you.
Okay, Jake, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Chad. So in front of you is the Connaught Project governance structure. So you can see that the Connaught Project Corporation and the JMHC are separate entities. That layer of governance is the board of directors for the Connaught Project Co., for which the voting shareholders have all rights to set what the board is for the Connaught Project Co. From there, we have our private shareholders on the left. So we engaged in a market sounding, as Chet mentioned earlier on, where we talked to local businesses in terms of what their interest would be in investing in the Connaught Project Corporation. There was a lot of interest. One of the key things to note here is that the purchase of a share does not entitle you to ownership of the unit, rather it entitles you to occupy a unit. So each shareholder will enter into a residential lease with the Connaught Project Corporation, and then there will be a sublease if there's an employee, or it might just be the residential lease if it's the private sector occupying that unit themselves. This structure allows for the JMHC to maintain control over the operating and capital elements of the Connaught Project Corporation. On the next slide, you'll see it allows for replicability, without meaningful restructuring of the JMHC for any future developments that the JMHC may want to invest in, such as another Connaught Project Corporation at a different location. It also allows for efficiencies in resourcing and knowledge management across the shared services. So the board of directors that the JCHC currently has, that knowledge can be transferred to the JMHC, which will in turn be transferred to the Connaught Project Corporation. As I previously mentioned, the private investors subscribe for shares and have an entitlement to occupy the units, but they don't actually own the units themselves. So the housing is also not allowed to be condominiumized to enable any one person to own the unit. Are there any questions on the governance shown in front of you?
Doesn't look like it.
Perfect. So as I mentioned, this allows for replicability for future developments. You can see a future development co here just shown for illustration purposes, but it would have another governance board, which would have a similar constituents of the governance two. And the governance one shown on the far right is the JMHC board for the MOJ existing assets that are to be transferred to the JMHC, the Connaught Project Co, and any other future development corporation. It's important to note that the JMHC has the only voting shares in all developments, current and future. So the Connaught development itself is 40 units, 20 one-bedroom units and 20 two-bedroom units. 10 of these units are to be earmarked for the municipality, and the remaining 30 units will be sold to the private market through a private share sale, which is to be determined by the board of directors of the JMHC. There's 4 different share types. There's the Class A and Class B, both voting shares, the 1 and 2 bedroom, and these will be for the JMHC. And then there's Class D and Class E, which are non-voting shares, which will be sold to the private shareholders. The voting shares entitles you to review and revise the corporate structure of the JMHC, determine the criteria for the board of director eligibility, as Bill and John mentioned earlier, and to amend the structure or replace individual directors on the board of the Connaught Project Corporation. The Class D and Class E shares entitle you to access to the units within the Connaught development. I'll pause there for any questions.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, sorry to interrupt. If there weren't any questions, just one other thing that I'd like to highlight for the public and for council, a choice that the board, if council chooses to set up the MCC, a choice that the board has is whether or not you would wish to offer some measure of financing for entities, individuals, or corporations that wanted to buy those private shares. So that's a choice. But I think it's important to acknowledge that that's something that the board will have to think about. These are equities. They're not physical assets, as Jake highlighted. And so they're not likely to be something that a person or a company can get a mortgage on. So they would either need to have the cash or they could leverage some other asset to have the cash. And that's the intent here. So I just wanted to make sure to highlight that for council.
Thank you, Bill.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon. And I appreciate the non-voting share structure. So it's a right to occupy, but it's not ownership. And I guess it can be seen in some sense as an equity share, but as you indicated, it can't really be leveraged. So have we been forced to abandon a notion that private sector could leverage an interest in the Connaught project for funding of their their share purchase price? I know that we had had some discussions about whether it was possible to allow non-voting shareholders who would be able to then leverage that share to get financing. But it seems to me that that now must be abandoned unless you can tell me how there is a way around that.
I can probably start there, and then maybe Bill, if you want to add anything, or John, if you want to add anything. We've done a little bit of research into this, and we found that it is quite challenging for the structure to work. Now, individual corporations, depending upon their relationships with their financial institutions, may be able to come to their own agreements with the institution, given the type of asset that this is. Having said that, to be conservative in our assumptions and in the way that we are portraying this to the private markets in our conversations with them, this is the way that we've portrayed it.
If I can speak up as well, the concern, firstly, I would imagine be difficult for a lot of private, banks or institutions to actually finance this for a private party. But let's just say we find somebody who does. The concern is what happens if there's a default on their loan to the private lender. The private lender's recourse is going to be that they're going to want to try to transfer the unit to a third party and so they can be repaid. And then as soon as that happens, the Connaught Project Corporation loses control over who actually has occupancy. So that's another real concern here, because I know that the goal is to ensure that you have control of who's going to be in place, that they're going to meet the criteria as per Parks Canada eligible residents. And so as soon as you allow a third party financer to take security over this, the share of the units, therefore that you also run the risk that you lose control over who will subsequently occupy it. So that's what, the preference is that the party either comes up with cash themselves or they can leverage an existing asset to do that. I believe Bill mentioned as well earlier the possibility of, that they need to consider that the corporation might need to self-finance it. That would be preferable, because then if there's a default, then the corporation is able to take, action on security to get possession of the property back. So that would be a preference. Now they'll have to, obviously the cash has got to come from somewhere, but in terms of control over the occupancy of the unit and control of the project as a whole, that's the preference.
Councillor Demoted.
Yeah, if I'm understanding it right, couldn't we word any type of contract or document to have that just default to the MCC or to the municipality to assume that share, I guess, if there was a default on a loan? Again, it wouldn't be like right of first refusal, it would just be an automatic default, I guess. So it doesn't go to a third party, unless I'm understanding that process wrong.
So sorry, but I'll field the question. If I understand it correctly, so you're referring to a situation to say, let's throw a fictional a proposal land or theoretical land, ATB. ATB is going to land. So if there's going to be a default to ATB, then you're saying that the corporation will then would take over the financing, you're saying, and so the unit would revert back to Connaught. If that's the case, that's not going to work, because then ATB is going to need to be made whole somehow. So that that's the very issue that if you want to take the unit back, then how ATB is going to have to be repaid, and ATB won't finance that unless they have security and confidence that they will be repaid somehow down the road. So the way that the structure as currently envisioned is that, if there's any sort of default period under the documentation, that, that the corporation, the Connaught Project Corporation, has the ability to repurchase the units and gain possession back. But that contemplates no third-party financing, because that just muddies the waters. And the third-party financing is the tricky issue.
And if I can just add to that, the challenge there that was implied, I think, in what John said, is that a third-party lender would want their interest, right? So the structure is set up so the corporation has essentially a first right of refusal to, or well, an opportunity to purchase back the shares. That's incorporated into the concept that exists, but at the expected share value, and the appreciation of the value of the shares is limited, and I think we'll speak to that probably shortly. I bet you it's on like the next slide. But so somebody will always be able to get their money out, and the amount that they will be able to get is capped to ensure that there's no speculation, buying for the purpose of just to see it appreciate. This is meant to be used in the community. So all of those things, I think, work well for some third party that's not involved in Jasper and worried about running a business and worried about housing for Jasperites. They will say, yeah, but I want my interest. I loaned you that money with the expectation of making a profit off of the interest. And if you default, I still need, as John said, to be made whole. And so the third party lenders, and ATV is great. But we'll use ATV as an example. They would have an expectation as when you default on a mortgage that they're going to get paid and they're going to make their profit in some way. So I think it would be up to the level of comfort with those third party lenders to decide whether this system would work for them. I think it's fair to say that it is not a slam dunk in the same way it would be if the owner was getting ownership of the physical asset. Just to be 100% true, it's not as easy as it might be if they were buying these units directly. But we also know that if they were buying these units directly, we wouldn't get all those other benefits like reduced land value. And we also wouldn't have the same kind of influence. Control might be a bit much, but the same kind of influence over the use of the units to ensure that they're meeting that core housing need that we have in Jasper. And so the intent here is to strike a reasonable balance that allows for that private investment that supports those community housing needs. And we have some choice that's available to us about how flexible and supportive we want to be in terms of enabling financing for some portions of this. And as John said, the money needs to come from somewhere, but the corporation will have an ability to think about that because it could choose to leverage the existing municipal housing assets to self-finance some portions of this. And what those terms are, how much, those are sort of to be determined. But that is a choice that the board will have if council moves forward with the MCC.
Any other questions? Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I don't want to enter into debate at all at this stage, Mr. Gibbon, but I am still concerned that one of the principal points that I think led us to the MCC in the first place was the potential, at least, that the commercial sector could potentially at least leverage their way into ownership. And so if that is not going to be possible, it changes from my perspective what we're doing. So in terms of reduced land acquisition costs, we still have that with all the co-ops in town. So you can have ownership and reduced land acquisition costs. So those are not at all incompatible. I understand this formulation doesn't permit ownership of a unit, but if the right to occupy is not a mortgageable interest, then we have, I think, really narrowed the prospective businesses that can engage with us. And we've restricted it to those with enough money for a full cash buy-in. And we're looking at $300,000 to $350,000. And probably those players are already in the market because they've got the means to go and buy a house somewhere if they need employee housing. But for the small businesses who are desperate and don't have access to that cash and they can't borrow against this rate, we continue to exclude help for them. And so this notion of how we might surmount this issue of being able to leverage the right to occupy seems to me to be pretty critical in all of this. I wonder whether we can explore it any further.
Yeah, Your Worship, I am actually happy to speak to that. So to be clear, the sort of foundational intent here was to find some way, and I'm just thinking about what wording I may have used over time, was to, I probably did say to leverage in private equity, meaning can we, as the municipality, bring in private dollars in to help fund the project? Because we have this, what is essentially a $6 million plus gap between the money we have from the borrowing and from the provincial grant to what it's going to cost to build a project. And so the question becomes, how do we bridge that gap? How do we get that money in? And I absolutely would like to leverage the private sector and their dollars in. Now, how they choose to finance that, that was never an intent to say they will be able to borrow against these assets. The benefit of this over the previous co-investment model is that the shares are an equity, they are an asset that a owner can show on their balance sheet as an asset that has a monetary value. Under the old co-investment model, where the concept, I think, notionally was asking for $15,000 every 3 or 5 years, that $15,000 is an expense that just disappears, and there's no asset that that investor, that co-investor, would ever be able to show. This share structure addresses that issue. So to be very clear, that's the issue that this was intended to address, and it does that. Anybody that buys a Class C share will be able to show on their books of their company that they have a $353,000 asset that they can sell, and that it has a value, and so they can show that on their balance sheet. And we believe that actually addresses the concerns or needs of some portion of the private sector. The other portion of the private sector that you're referencing, Mayor Ireland, about those smaller players that don't have 353,000 kicking around, which is a reasonable comment, is that policy choice and the strategy in the sales strategy, if I can use that term. It's maybe not exactly accurate, but what is our sales strategy in order to ensure that we get good uptake and that we sell out? And again, I'm using those terms a bit loosely, but that, we want to ensure that we sell out all the shares so we raise all the capital that we need so we can do the construction. Well, we may need to offer some terms, some financing terms, self-financing terms, in order to make that attainable for some individuals or smaller businesses. And we would have to have a good discussion at the board level about how much risk do we take on, and are we willing to take on in order to meet those aims. I mean, if we go to the market and the private sector lines up and says, this is great, we all have 353,000 kicking around in our stockings, and we want to buy the shares immediately, well, then there's no need for us to take on additional risk and offer financing terms for different players. If we go to the market and the market says, well, hold on, we can only sell 50% of the available shares, and the other 50% aren't selling, well, then maybe we do need to offer some financing terms. And those are sort of tactical decisions that are really around a sales process. At least this is how the current proposal is structured. And it does have that limitation that a private entity is unlikely, although we can't speak on the behalf of all third-party lenders, but is unlikely to be able to borrow against this type of asset, this type of non-physical asset. So Your Worship, I think this is addressing the original intent, allowing investors to show an asset on their balance sheets that has a value. And we have some choice available to us about our strategy and tactics to ensure the most uptake in the market possible. And whether we say businesses that are sole proprietorships under 10 employees are eligible for financing of up to $100,000 with terms of 10-year repayment at a rate of it. Like, I'm getting very specific, but you can kind of see we can craft that in whatever way we want to. That's available to the corporation if we structure it this way.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gibbon, and I thank all of our guests waiting patiently as I indulged you in this long discussion, but I appreciate it, and I appreciated that you mentioned that there might be money stuffed in socks rather than under mattresses, because of course it's the mattresses that we're trying to get produced here. But thank you for that explanation. I appreciate it.
Councillor Demota.
Well, I like that line of questioning, and from the get-go, prior to even getting the lands, A, B, and C, with the G designation, originally, like, there was some idea of having some equity building opportunities for community members in town, and I really like all the information that's been given to us with the housing stock and the community and all that. You know, right now we're facing a little bit of a change in, you know, a lot of the demographics. We have a lot of baby boomers that own houses in the community. Some of them are empty for, you know, the winter part time of the year. Some of them only have a single person living in them, and some of them, members of the community are unable to downsize because of, you know, the lack of ability to do that. So we have a lot of space that's available in the community, and eventually, you know, those houses are going to come to market, and maybe the only opportunity for purchasing are going to be the bigger businesses that are able to do that, to have them for staff housing, you know, or people that don't live in the community that buy that as some type of real estate. And so we're going to be missing out on, you know, attracting and retaining young families in this community. And I always wanted to see a model where, with co-investment from the municipality or something like an MCC, where community members that are invested in staying in Jasper can take some of that money, regardless if it's at an increased value through interest, or just get the money back that they put in, or half of it back, so that they can use it as a down payment on the house. You have an opportunity like this to launch somebody into a house just to, you know, as an investment from the community for people to stay in the community. Because we're going to be hitting a big wall here in about 10 years. And it's going to be even worse even if we have this housing stock, when it comes down to like local residents being able to afford a house in town. So there's just, I'm not sure if we can do that here, but if we had that opportunity, I think that would be a great benefit. I think Mr. Gibbon has his hand.
I don't see more questions. Oh, sorry. CAO Gifford.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Sorry, I was about to respond, but I wanted to recognize the chair first before I did. Just to speak to Councillor Demota's sort of line of thought there, this structure does consider the opportunity for individuals to purchase shares, so that is possible. Exactly. The structure also is explicit that there is a appreciation, and so, but it is capped. And right now in the business plan, it shows that appreciation of shares is at 2% interest per year. So it is. I mean, to be very frank, it's not a great investment. It's not a money-making investment to invest in this kind of property. It is a worthwhile investment if you're looking for somewhere to live, because you know that it won't go down and that there will be that, you know, that appreciation. It is probably a better, and this is indirect, and we don't have an ability to control it, but I would hope that, and if we can go back to the financial one that we were just on, thanks, Chad. I would hope that a business that is looking for staff accommodation that it might seem more attractive. I hope that it'll be more attractive to buy two bedroom shares rather than one 4-bedroom house, because that 4-bedroom house is better left to the market for families, right? Like right now, I think, and this is an opinion, but my assessment of the situation is that businesses are buying single family homes and using them as staff accommodation for a couple of reasons. One, and probably the primary reason, because that's all there is to buy. And so what we're doing is creating another type of housing that's available that is more purpose-built and more suited to this type of use. And so hopefully, you know, the small operator that is, and you know, we probably all know somebody who is a relatively small local operation that's gone out and bought a home for $900,000 for staff accommodation. And that's a home that could have been left in the market. Ideally, rather than doing that, and again, subject to these things that we're talking about borrowing and private financing, everything else, ideally that small business would choose to purchase these shares rather than that home, and that home could be left in the market for families. The other thing that's a part of the overall value proposition here is that this will be property managed. And so a business that uses these for staff accommodation gets out of the business of having to change light bulbs. So there's an additional complication with a business managing their own staff accommodation, in that they have to be property managers and not just rafting company operators or restaurateurs or whatever else. They're also property managers so they can run their business. And that's a part of the overall value proposition that's here. Sure, you're getting a lower rate of return, you can't speculate, you know, but also you can go and concentrate on running your business rather than having to manage a property and all the challenges that come with managing tenants, because this will be a professionally managed property. So it is a whole picture, and we'll have to see how the market receives that. Chet, back to you.
Thanks, Bill. And I'm happy that you said that and said it so well, because we did extensive market soundings to validate some of this. And we interviewed businesses ranging, you know, from a handful of employees to ones that are very, very large. And one of the things that we found as a pain point was that businesses unanimously said they have trouble attracting families and talent, or, you know, couples, because in a shared room housing accommodation, there's a lack of privacy, and that really hinders a lot of the demand for the jobs. And so they viewed this as a very eloquent solution. As you know, as Bill mentioned, it's property managed, they don't have to be in that business, but also the single bedroom and the 2-bedroom units provide them with, you know, private bathroom, safety, and privacy that they're not getting. And the hope is that organically this will free up some of the larger homes for more entrenched families in the community who need the space.
Just to add to that, Chet, the share price wasn't the primary concern we heard from the shareholders or the private entities we interviewed. It was the rental rates, and the rental rates we get to on the next slide, but they are all affordable as defined by the AHPP, for which the Municipality of Jasper was a recipient.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Demoda, you have your hand.
Yeah, just because it was from what Mr. Dividend said, as far as I understood this document, and maybe I didn't read it completely well, I understood that Class A and Class B shares were just for municipality staff.
No, sorry, no, those are the voting shares that the municipality will own, not for municipal staff. The municipality will essentially own 10 shares, which equates to 10 units. And we will have some choice available to us. We can rent them out on the private market to the public at the affordable rental rates, which will be described next. So we could do that. We could choose to use them as an employer and have them as staff accommodation. That's possible. There are other more innovative uses that are, and I just want to be very clear, these would be council policy choices, not corporate choices, right? The municipality will be an owner, and the municipality can do with its shares or units what it wishes to do, right? As long as the rent is paid every month. And another policy option that could be available is to keep some of those 10 units available for other social purpose housing. And there's a broad spectrum of things that are possible there. I don't want to speculate about some of them. Administration has some ideas, but those are policy choices that will be available to council because the municipality will own 10 units. I'll be careful about that, you know, equating them with owning units directly, but for all intents and purposes, we'll have 10 units. We can choose what to do with them. And that enables policy choice for council that doesn't exist today because we just physically don't have these kind of units.
Thank you. And to expand on that clarity through you, Deputy Mayor, I appreciate it. Just a little scenario. Let's say I'm Joe Schmo and I'm in the service sector, bartender, server. My partner works, you know, doesn't matter where, as in accounting and at a business somewhere. And throughout the years, we're able to save up some money to get something. Now, am I now, as a member of the community here, renting somewhere else, couch surfing, whatever, am I able to purchase a share of Class A, B, D, or E as a share, and then have the opportunity once that equity is built to sell it? I guess that's where I've been going all along.
Yeah, Councillor Demota, the answer is the only shares that would be available to somebody like that would be D and E. And you see that the cost of those shares is actually less. But so those are the only ones that would be available because they are non-voting. And the difference is that the voting shares, which will all be owned by the municipality, are the ones that get to handle the corporate structure of the organization, that get to appoint directors, you know, like, and so if you want to be an owner of a unit, sorry, and they're just going to blend together that way as we discuss this, but if I want to be an owner, an individual owner, and I want to occupy a unit, or I want my staff to occupy a unit, you can do that 304, 353, but you don't get to appoint somebody to the board just because you own a unit, right? Only the municipality has that control of appointing people to the board.
Right. So if I'm able to get one of those D or E shares, now once I purchase that, am I paying myself rent now? Is that like, is there rent on top of that initial purchase back to the MCC? Is that how the whole thing works?
That's exactly right. And so, and that's actually, I think, the next slide. And so you've given us a good segue. But yes, absolutely, there is rent, and there is the expectation that all of the rents on all of these shares, classes A, B, D, and E, will be paid every month. And that's an obligation of the shareholder to ensure that that rent is paid. They can choose to pay it themselves and keep nobody in the unit. They can choose to have all of the rental costs be paid by the employee that lives in the unit. They could choose to subsidize their employees' rental cost. If I'm occupying a unit that I bought, then I'm obligated to pay my rent as well, because it's reflective of the mortgage on the property, you know, the $5 million of borrowing, the property management fees, and all the other utilities and insurance and everything else. So yes, there is absolutely rent, and it's important to be clear about that the costs are the upfront capital cost of purchasing a share and the ongoing operating cost of rental expense on a monthly basis. Maybe that's a good place to transition if there aren't other questions, Deputy Mayor Waxer.
There is one more question. Mayor Otter.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Mr. Gibbon, you could have guessed that, but through you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to either one of our guests from Collier's, just specific to that slide that's before us, is the differential in value for the shares, the voting shares, as compared to the non-voting shares? And in each case, it's the municipal shares, the voting shares are about 1/3 higher. Is that the result of the application of a known formula, or is that attributed to the art of the consultant?
Jake, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to take
For
that
sure. Yeah.
Nobody wants to take it. Okay.
one?
The share price for Class A and Class B is calculated because of Jasper's commitment to affordable housing and the $5 million debenture that they've committed to this initiative through the Connaught development. The remaining capital, as Bill mentioned earlier, there's roughly $6 to $7 million required for the capital cost to fund the Connaught Project Corporation or the Connaught development itself. And the proportional rate between the 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom is attributed to the difference in rental rates as well. So the share price for Class D and E is significantly less than Class A and B because that the municipality of Jasper has committed to delivering affordable housing within the municipality.
If I could just expand on that. So the Class A and B shares are, essentially the $5 million debenture divided by the 10 shares, and the 10 shares were determined, as something that would be really a useful tool to deploy against, policy objectives, as Bill has kind of said, and then the remainder of the cost of the project following the AHPP grant and the $5 million debenture is spread amongst the 30 remaining private shares.
Perfect, I understand that. So the application of a formula, it makes sense. So the A and B shares related to the $5 million debenture to which we're already committed, and the D and E shares related to the additional equity financing that we're anticipating from the private sector. Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think you're free to continue.
Thank you. So as mentioned before, the municipality of Jasper was successful with the AHP application for a $6.5 million grant from the province. Now, in order to meet the requirements, there are certain restrictions around the rental rates for each of the units within the Connaught development. There's 3 different rental bands that they consider. They have minimum rent, mid-range rent, and market rent. So market rent is 100% equivalent to market rental value within the municipality. The mid-range is anywhere between 60 and 90% of market rate, and the minimum rent is 60% of market rate. So we've used the government of Alberta defined rental rates within the municipality of Jasper and used the AHPP percentages. We use 60% for the minimum and 75% as it's in between the 60 and 90% of market rental for that mid-range band. From there, we forecasted these out to 2031 using an annual rate of change associated with the market rentals, and applied that to the Connaught development, where there are 10 minimum rent units, all of which will be owned by the municipality of Jasper, or the JMHC, sorry. And the mid-range rent will go to market for the private sector to rent still at 75%. And the HPP defines both minimum rent and mid-range rent as affordable housing. So therefore, we meet all the terms and conditions of the HPP, and the Connaught Drive project is completely affordable housing. Are there any questions?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, while council's considering if they have questions, I think, Jake, can you, and I mean, it's actually not that difficult in math, but for example, the mid-range rent, because this will be a key question the public will have, well, what is the monthly rental cost? And so this, as you can see, in, based on 2022 values, well, let's maybe say 2026 when we expect the project to be up and going, a 2-bedroom, the most expensive rental amount per month, and this would be in the market rate units likely, would be for those mid-range rental 2-bedroom, the one at the bottom of this table here, and you'll see that's just over $13,000 a year, or slightly more than $1,000 a month to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. So, and at the bottom end, if you looked at that 9,274, you can divide that by 12, but that would be the minimum amount. And so those are, I think, by all the sort of measures, very attractive and affordable rental rates, considering what we see in the Jasper market. And so the entire project is below market and offering improved and more affordable options for anybody that's in any of the units, whether they're owned by the municipality or whether they're units that would be owned by on the private side by an individual owner or business.
Councillor Jamoda.
Yeah, I just did some rough calculations here. If I wanted to privately invest and just to have a place to live and pay rent, if I'm able to even get a CMHC 5% loan to attain that, my mortgage payments would be $1,593, so $1,600, and then my rent would be $1,000 a month, so $2,600 a month to, if I wanted to get something to build some equity. So it's a bit hefty, but if you wanted to sell your share at the end of it, then at least you have some, kind of a leaping investment there. It'll be tough for two people for a 1-bedroom, but if you really wanted to do it, you could pull it off.
Other questions? Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, and I believe this question, I may be getting ahead of myself, but the rents that are here, these are rents that would need to be agreed to by the participants in the 1 and 2 bedroom or the Class D and Class E shares, correct?
They would be set by the board of directors of the Connaught Project Co., which is the responsibility of the JMHC. Either annually, biannually, the board of directors would need to determine the frequency in which they are set. However, yes, they would be setting.
So just when you think about a private investor going in, while they may be putting $353,000 in initially for a 2-bedroom apartment, they have rent certainty for their employees, which is actually quite beneficial. In other words, they're able to provide accommodation for their employees at a reasonable rate, because the unit itself was built at probably below market value, and they're able to provide a benefit to their employee, even though the employee may be paying the $1,100, let's say in 2026 for a 2-bedroom apartment. They're actually making it very affordable for their employee because they put up that $353,000 up front. It's actually over time very beneficial for the business. It's just getting over the hurdle of the initial $353,000.
Any other questions? Sorry, Councillor Kelleher-Enby.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Just on the rentals, so because it's complex and like go up, does that include utilities, or then the employer is paying that on top of that again? I'm just curious.
So the question was around whether or not utilities are included.
Yes.
Yes, so utilities are included, the property management's included, capital reserves included, everything. As previously shown, the Connaught Project Corporation, once renters are within the building, is making upwards of $280,000 annually from this rental model, which covers all expenditures associated with the property. And that includes property management as well for things like snow clearing, fixing those light bulbs that go out, whatever it may be.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I think okay to continue.
Thank you. So shown before you is the capital costs associated with the Connaught Project development, roughly totaling $23.6 million. The land costs are roughly $2.085 million, which we assume there will be a contribution from Parks Canada towards this land value. There's design services, construction services, project support services, furniture, fixings, and equipment are not included. The contingency has been built into each amount shown before you. The building permit fee and compliance deposit are requirements by Parks Canada. So the permit fee is a one-time fee, and the compliance deposit is before construction and accrues interest throughout construction. We assumed 3% from Parks Canada, and therefore is returned upon completion of the development itself, which is shown in the total cash flow earlier on in the presentation.
Questions? Mayor,
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. This might just be semantics. You indicate on the right side of the screen there that the capital cost is conservative. I think it looks liberal. It's overly generous, is it not? You've estimated high, but it could be less.
We have estimated high. We used 28% escalation year over year from the time at which the Class C cost estimates were developed, which was 2 years ago. And as we all know, there's been significant changes throughout COVID, primarily around supply chain issues and availability of materials. So we believe the estimate to be conservative.
Just with respect to construction, at a $19 million cost, roughly $500,000 per unit for 40 units. How solid is that number? Council recently had experience of a project with construction costs increased by 45% over time. How detailed is that construction cost that's in this estimate? And I don't understand exactly how they do costs, but we've heard everything from about a Class E to a Class A estimate. Where would this fall and what variation might we anticipate?
Yes, so initially during the Rapid Housing Initiative application process from the Municipality of Jasper's application, there was 3 design build firms that submitted bids, which had a little bit of range around $12 to $14 million in capital costs. That was roughly 3.5 years or 4 years ago, I believe. So during the AHPP grant application process, costs were escalated to $2022. And then we successfully received the AHPP grant, which was great. So from there, though, that assumed an initial construction start date of June 2023. Recognizing that we haven't even set up or established the JMHC, we escalated that to 2023 or 2024 beginning of construction to 2026 start of operation. So 2025 December is when the building could be built. Following this council presentation and depending on your decision to go for public hearing, from there we would reach out to the design build firms that initially submitted these bids and go from there to get updated capital cost estimates. A Class C cost estimate is anywhere in the range of plus or minus 15%. And this contingency has been built in to the construction services, project support services shown as the line items in front of you.
Thank you.
looks like we're good to continue on.
Thank you. So this slide summarizes the operations of the Connaught development. So as I stated, 2024 and 2025 is when we can see when we see construction happening for the Connaught development. The lease with Parks Canada will be the standard lease, 42 years long. We've modeled the entire operations of the Connaught development and the JMHC for that duration as well. So we assume there will be an initial front heavy capitalization in 2024 for land cost, design services, and purchase of equipment and materials required. And then 2025, the remaining portion of the capital cost will be attributed in that year. From there, we begin operations in 2026. As you can see, the rental revenues are $470,000. The operational and maintenance costs associated with the Connaught development is approximately 190,000 annually. Now, it is important to note that some of the agreements that will need to be in place for the operations and maintenance still need to be negotiated between the JMHC, if established, and the service provider. Those are still, there have been early talks, however, those haven't happened as of today or recently. However, that's our best estimate on the operation and maintenance based on accepted practices of similar developments within the area.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I'll also just speak to that around the property management side. Administration has had a preliminary conversation with the CEO of the Evergreens Foundation, who do property management in Jasper on other properties. She evaluated the number that's in the financial plan and believed that it was a reasonable estimate, and that would be pretty reflective of what it would cost Evergreens to manage this type of property. And so I appreciate Jake's sort of leaving open that there's a range of options that are available and that Evergreens has not committed to anything. But we have discussed this with the CEO of Evergreens. They've reviewed that number. They believe that it's an accurate representation of what the cost would be. And we'll have that opportunity to have a discussion with them if it makes sense for Evergreens to be the property manager, since they are already managing other properties in Jasper, and there may be some mutual benefit in terms of getting critical mass of operations for them in Jasper. But we could also pursue property management through a private firm, or there are other options available to us. But just to give you that confidence that we are talking with Evergreens, but they have not committed to anything, and we're not expecting, and basing this proposal on the imagination that they will be the ones to operate it. That's a discussion that will have to happen between the board of the MCC and Evergreens in the future, but administration started that at a preliminary level.
And included in the operations and maintenance shown in that line item is the repair and maintenance of the property, utilities, insurance, property taxes, a replacement reserve. Administrative expenses include the business license required and the Connaught setup fees, as well as it is a corporation. The management fee, which is for the contracted services from the Municipality of Jasper, which totals 190,000 in 2026 and has escalated throughout.
Questions? I think we're okay to move on.
Okay, thank you. So next steps from this meeting, council motion to direct administration to establish a statutory public hearing. Depending on that motion, we will host the statutory public hearing, and subject to that hearing, council may subsequently pass a motion to establish the JMHC.
Thanks, Jake. And that's probably where, as administration, we would take over, and Jake can maybe take the presentation down. So council, that's an overview of the business plan and the financial model. The details, as you saw in your council package, are all there for you and for the public to review and comment on. We hope that members of the private sector will review those and be prepared to give some feedback to council and to administration, between now and the public hearing or at the public hearing. But the next step, as Jake just said, there is a formalized process. If council wishes to incorporate that MCC, John from Brownlee raised that for us a while ago. There is a required advertising time, and that formalized public hearing process that needs to go through before council can make a choice. And so the recommendation in front of you today is really around that process, and recognizes that the first available time that would allow us to meet the requirements under the legislation would be August 15th. That recognizing that council does have a break built into the council schedule, and so that would be the first regular council meeting after the midsummer break. Administration does have some alternatives. If council wanted to proceed sooner, you could consider establishing a special regular council meeting on August 1st for the purpose of this public hearing. But we appreciate that that's in the middle of that council break, and we built it in the calendar for a reason. But if council want to proceed sooner, that would be the first available date that would meet the minimum advertising requirements under the MGA. You could also establish a special council meeting at the first committee of the whole. So you would have a committee of the whole and a regular council meeting on August 8th. The recommendation from administration is that probably the best way to do this without sort of forcing the issue would be to use the first regular council meeting that's on the council calendar, and that's August 15th. That would allow administration appropriate time to advertise the public hearing and for the public and interested parties to review this information that's in the package, and then for them to be able to provide comment to council at that public hearing, whether it would be written comment or verbal. And so the administrative recommendation is that council establish August 15th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. in the quorum room as the date, time, and location for public hearing purposes for council to consider the establishment of a municipally controlled corporation. I'm happy to answer any other sort of administrative questions, but council, I hope that you have gained some insight into what the strategy is and the details of the structure that administration and our team have been able to establish.
Thank you so much. Questions? Councillor Jamoda.
I think I'd probably lean more towards if we're gonna do this August 15th, and I think we should just, we need to do it anyway. I'd like to, you know, have it out there for a few weeks and see if there's some interest from the public, and maybe encourage people to read these documents. And I mean, a lot of it is pretty straightforward, but it encourages people to come out and ask some of the questions that we asked today for a better understanding. If they're unable to watch the video, or if they weren't present today. You know, my concern with the alternative dates is the August long weekend is kind of where we peak, where the Jasper is the most full out of, you know, every single weekend out of the year, and it just kind of peaks there. And then for 2 weeks we're at maximum capacity. So even then, I don't know how much time people will have to digest all this, but I think with some advertising, we can at least get some interest to come back. It's unfortunate this has to be right at the peak of summertime, and people's attentions might be elsewhere. But if that's what we need to do to get this thing going forward, then I think it's prudent to at least have that public hearing.
Any other comments or questions? Mayor Riley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, through you to Mr. Given, although he's disappeared. There he is. If after the public hearing, council determines to adjust aspects of the MCC or the business plan, is a subsequent public hearing also required to deal with changes? And what parameters exist once we hear from the public to make changes, and what's the requirement to go back to the public if we decide to do that?
Your Worship, I will just check to make sure that John is still on, John McDonald from Brownlee. My belief would be that council would have the opportunity to pass a motion to amend if necessary at the public hearing. So John, I saw you nod in the affirmative there, that so if council received input at the public hearing or on consideration wished to adjust some portion of the business plan in some way, that you would have that right at the public hearing to do so and then proceed. John, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the very purpose of the public hearing, because the public may have some new insight that no one here thought of, that said it's a good thought that we have to amend on the fly. So that's the public hearing is to inform, but also to accept inputs. And if there's something valuable to incorporate, it can be revised to address those issues that are raised.
And the only thing that I would add to that is a part of and really the purpose of bringing this today is to ensure that the public and council have as much time as possible to really get into the details, because there has been a good solid 6 months of significant work by our outside consultants that have a lot of expertise. And so council and the public should have some time to consider that in detail, and any changes on the fly need to be measured and very well thought through. And so I would encourage council to start thinking about that now. Administration believes that this meets all the intents that we started this discussion with, which again, just as a reminder to council, was the ability to bring in private financing, the ability to take debt off the municipality's books, and to be able to support affordable housing. And so, this structure does all of those things. And it is complicated. To be very clear, we're talking about 2 corporations, different share structures and very detailed financials. And so we would want to ensure that this information is out in the public forum, and so that any input or suggested changes acknowledge that there's that detailed work, and a change in one area may sort of pop up with an implication in another area, and so they need to be well thought through. But change is possible, and that is a right of council at a public hearing.
If I may continue, to what extent then is, say, the unanimous shareholders agreement part of the business plan? Because I want to raise some issues, but I don't want to take too much of council or the public time right now, but it's on the agenda. Seems to me it's part of the package that would go to the public for a public hearing. I would like perhaps an opportunity to refine that document if it's really important to the outcome, sort of before, not after the public hearing. Is that an opportunity?
Yeah, so I can address that. So firstly, the unanimous shareholder agreement is not mandatory. It does not have to be included in the business plan. It can, and it is now, but it's not a legislative obligation. And just so also we're clear that the business plan is not necessarily it does not necessarily have to be disclosed at the public hearing as well. The municipally controlled corporations regulation prescribes the things that need to be included. And the business plan does not need to be. And the reason why, just so you understand the legislative rationale behind that, is that it's always possible that the business plan has some confidential business trade secrets that you don't want the public to get out and into the world. I've done some municipally controlled corporations where that was in fact the case. But the USA is a document that needs to be considered by council. And it's, MOJ will be signatory to it. And that's something that it is right and proper that you have your inputs and make sure that's something you understand and something that you bless. And if it requires revisions for whatever circumstances, we can do that. Or if you just have questions or seek clarity as well, that's something that can be addressed at the time. I don't know if today is the place or if at a subsequent time. But yeah.
Your Worship, administration and our team, John and others, happy to work with council, yourself, to go through some of those more technical concerns that you might have. And if there is a suite of adjustments that need to be made that are not to the business plan, right? Because the business plan, we want the public to be able to see that and comment on it. But on those ones that are not required to be a part of the public hearing, but that we, I think, do want to take forward to try to move things along, we'd be happy to work with you, and we could even produce a list of proposed amendments that could be introduced at the public hearing that specify what those changes are, so they're not done off the cuff, and that they are done in the view of the public. So we could work with you between now and the public hearing to build something like that.
Well, I wonder if I might take this opportunity then just to raise one, and then others can come later and we can potentially have amendments before the public hearing. But I was struck by what I saw as a contradiction between the intent as expressed in the USA and the intent of the MCC as described in the request for decision, and specifically relating to the potential transfer of existing assets to the JMHC. So we talked about the rental houses and the clinic earlier. And my understanding was that those would transfer, and then we talked about how the subsidy would work and all the rest of it. But the unanimous shareholders agreement indicates that the corporation, the Municipal Housing Corporation, will manage the JCHC assets, which suggests to me that those are still the assets of the JCHC. And the new corporation is just manage them, which is quite different than transferring the assets. And so my question is, what is it to be?
Your worship, I think that you caught a change in the way that we're going to refer to the corporation that wasn't populated through the document. And this is, so you'll see the name of the corporation that's being proposed here is the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation. It could take on some other more eloquent trade name at some point in the future if it wanted to, I suppose. But for now, the Jasper Municipal Housing Corporation, we wanted to ensure that that was distinct from the previously existing JCHC. I think the shareholders agreement still references JCHC rather than JMHC. John?
Actually, I respectfully disagree with that. I think that, and the error is probably, it lies with me. I was of the, I think, mistaken impression, it sounds like. I thought that those assets are going to remain with JHC and that the JMHC was going to manage it, but not own it. So and it sounds like afterwards, so that's my error for, for not understanding that it's going to be transferred forward. So that's an easy fix. And I appreciate, if that's the intent, that's an easy fix to the verbiage. I can do that. And I apologize for not catching that and carrying that forward.
Thanks for that clarity, John. And for additional clarity, the JCHC doesn't currently have any assets. That's the other and a part of the whole startup of this conversation was those housing units and the cottage clinic aren't actually owned by JCHC. They're more technically, well, the technical ownership is even more complicated, but for all intents and purposes, they're owned by the municipality. The JCHC itself, as it currently exists, doesn't have any assets, doesn't have any liability, doesn't have any staff. Well, it's had that Part 0.3 staff position. And we'll make sure that the USA reflects sort of the appropriate structure here.
Yeah, just to follow up on that one point, that actually does reference the fact that the JCHE assets are owned by the MOJ. It does state that. It's just that I didn't have it transferred over. So anyway, that's on the to-do list for the next revision.
But I appreciate all of that. And then if I go back to the subsidy question that we discussed earlier, maybe what is in the unanimous shareholders agreement would be an approach to go, saying that the JMHC will manage those other assets. Then I think we would need a contract with, between the parties, between the JMHC and the JCHC. But I think that might help resolve that subsidy issue and let the Connaught project stand on its own as financially viable, and whatever subsidy we are currently engaged in stays out of that equation. We've made commitments. We can do a management contract with somebody to manage those assets, and then we don't confuse the subsidy with the new project. So even though John has fallen on his sword graciously here, that might not be a mistake. That might be the better way to do it if we go back and change the intent of the MCC.
Agreed. I think that's a change we can make.
Councillor Demoda.
Well, with all those acronyms, I was almost OTL and SOL because of that, but I think I got it collected, and I'm glad how Mayor Ireland or Major Ireland wrapped that up at the end. I was just through you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to Mr. Gibbon. I was wondering if there's an opportunity to have the business plan, the MCC business plan, the draft one that's in our council documents today, put on the front page of our website, just kind of have that flagged at the top, and you know, whatever date we decide on, and just have that as an upcoming event. And because I'd like to direct as many people to that as possible, because I think we have a good opportunity for public engagement here, and this is a big one for the community. And you know, the more people we get out in person, it'd be great.
Deputy Mayor Waxer for Councillor Demoda. Yes, administration's already talked about that. I believe our communications team has already started to create a section on the website. We probably won't put it as its own sort of button, but we will do a news highlight to direct people there. We'll create it as a separate event, and we'll have a dedicated area that contains all of these documents, so they're easy for people to access and download and find. And then we're also working on building a frequently asked questions, because we can imagine that even now, you know, with this conversation going out into the community and sort of the public awareness, we may start to get some questions about, when can I rent? How much will rent be? How much is down payment? Like, we can, and some of those are, we don't know the answer to that yet, because there, you know, are these choices that the board of the corporation will have to make about whether it offers financing or not. But administration is aware that there will be lots of public questions. We've considered that and are starting to build a frequently asked questions section that will be a part of a comprehensive portion of our website focused on this project. And I believe we were going to have it live under the major projects tab, because obviously the setup of this corporation and the construction of the apartment building are by definition major projects. So we're already starting the groundwork for that. And it was dependent on council's decision today of whether you're going to go ahead with a public hearing or not.
Councillor Demoda.
Well, I think before we decide that and take a break, I'm not sure if we wanted to do that and decide on that public hearing afterwards. I just do have one final question for you, Mr. Gibbon. Are you in a rented shored fishing shack, interior paneled minivan, or is that your hotel room? Because if it's the latter, I commend you on saving some municipal expenses on your accommodation.
Well, you know, nothing. You know, I like to say Jasper is first class. The accommodations here in Canmore are obviously excellent as well. But yes, I'm in my hotel room, and the wood paneling is just a nice decorative feature.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, through you to Mr. Gibbon, and potentially to John. The public hearing is with respect to the establishment of the MCC, but in this case, it seems to me that what are we calling it? The Connaught Project Corporation becomes a pretty critical component for those members of the public who might have an interest first in becoming non-voting shareholders of the MCC. So what is downstream? So is there an obligation at the public hearing to flesh out that next corporation, the Connaught Project Corporation, to any degree, and particularly if that is to have a unanimous shareholders agreement, that is something that would be of interest, I think, to those who are going to potentially buy in. So do we have any obligation to be prepared for that by whatever date we select for the public hearing?
I mean, I would suggest yes, because the reality is you're going to get questions from your public on those points, and you need to be prepared. And that's something that is relevant. It's material facts that should be out there. There is a draft unanimous shareholder agreement prepared already for the project corporation that is there. So that has to be worked through, but like that's in that draft format. But yes, I think you really need to understand those points, the next point, because that's what the public's going to get at. They're not, most of the public's not going to really care about the differentiation between the two corporations. They're just going to know, what's this project going to be, what's going to cost me, how do I get access, how, the things that Bill said excuse me, a couple of minutes ago. What's going to cost me, how do I get in, what's my down payment going to look like? So you need to address those points.
All right, thank you for that. And sorry, Bill, if you wanted to continue, go ahead.
Yeah, no, Your Worship. So John hit it on the head. And in addition, I would say there are some things that will probably be future decision making. So the composition of the board, for example, council, as the one structuring the corporation, has choice available to them of who you want to have on the board, or and so you could allow some spaces for other shareholders. You could designate spaces for specific other entities. We reference in the document that you may wish to consider whether there's a role for Parks Canada in either part of this. Again, just to establish that there will be that ongoing public benefit. And I don't think those choices need to be made in advance. They could be made as the corporation sets itself up and in response to market feedback, right? So there is a little bit of that responsiveness. I don't think that the determination of whether to do a corporation or not relies on answering 100% of all of the possible questions for all future time at the public hearing, because there will be some adjustments that will need to be made over time. And as you know, shareholders agreements can change. They can be amended. But certainly we should have the major outlines so prospective investors would understand. And council may want to start to give some thought about, who is best suited to act as stewards of this corporation, the MCC itself and the Connaught Project Co., and what level of involvement you might wish to offer other investors or other parties. Not that you need to answer that, but you may want to start to think about it.
Very well, thank you both. So I take it then for the subsidiary corporation, although not actually a subsidiary of anything, but the downstream corporation, the project corporation, that's in the works, but it's not finalized. If we work backwards and recognizing that summertime is not just a bit of a vacation time for council, but other people have holidays as well. So if we back up from, say, August 15, is there a date by which we have to give notice of the public hearing and present publicly the information that is available? And starting from today, which is the end of June, can we get that done in time in July to give proper notice? These are just factors that would influence my decision on whether we should go August 1st, 8 or 15. We've got to be ready, and at some point we have to coalesce some more documents, some information about the project corporation, and if there is a deadline by which we have to tell the public what it is they're coming to talk about. Let's figure that out so we can pick some dates.
Your Worship, and John, I imagine you may be checking this about what the Act says in terms of the timeline, so I'll buy you a little time to do so. But in the attached business plan on page 36 of your council package, you will see the provincial requirements for what needs to be presented to council at a public hearing for the business plan, and you can see how the attached document from Colliers addresses those and where they are. So. And you'll see that the unanimous shareholders agreement is not one of those items that's there. And certainly the details of the downstream corporation are not either. That aside, I think it's worthwhile to have much of that out there for the public. And I believe that we likely need to have a minimum of 4 weeks of public advertising before the public hearing. That's I think the standard practice. John?
30 days.
30 days.
30 days, yeah. So close, 30 days, but yeah, that's the legislative requirement.
And so as you can see, the proposed August 15th as recommended by administration provides us some extra opportunity to make some adjustments if necessary and to develop some of these additional sort of above and beyond level of disclosure if we wish to, like a draft USA for the project co. I believe we probably, considering it's already in draft form, I believe we probably could manage that. And in line with the required timelines for public advertising in advance of the hearing.
Councillor Demoda.
Yeah, you know, I think I would be open to aiming for the 15th, and you know, just to address some of the concerns that Mayor Ireland had and some of the information that Mr. Gibbon's been giving us. I think that if we put a placeholder on every agenda, at least for the 2 committee meetings before the 15th, on like just an update or where we want to go, maybe every agenda, and because it's an important thing, I think, and then just so we can address some of the concerns that come up, and then we'll have that on every agenda going forward till the 15th. Does that make sense?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, if I may, happy to provide council updates about how the work is going. I don't know that it would be a topic of discussion at every council meeting between now and the 15th, because, I mean, to be very frank, Councillor Devoto, we would end up writing a bunch of staff reports rather than working on the work. But I think it is reasonable. I think it is reasonable for administration to ensure that we're updating council about progress and timelines, so that both you and the public are aware of what's happening and when the full and sort of most recent documentation will be available to the public. Absolutely. But I don't know that there's additional direction in terms of the content that administration is going to require that will be done most productively in the context of public council meetings. If there are technical amendments, you know, Mayor Ireland was identified a few things. Some of those adjustments we can do offline, and then ensure that that final package that goes for the public advertising is full and complete, and we can ensure that council's aware of any adjustments that are being made and about how progress is going, for sure. I'd see those.
Right, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that my intention was to have a report for every single meeting. I was just to have it there as for a topic of discussion. So that's fine. We can do that as we go on. I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, if you're ready. I was just about to ask if we wanted a break first and then the motion, but you're good.
I think the motion scope. I move that committee direct administration to initiate the public hearing process as required by the Municipal Governance Act for council to consider the establishment of a municipally controlled corporation for the purposes of developing community housing, and the committee establish August 15th, 2023 at 1:30 p.m. at the Quorum Room as the date and time for location of the public hearing. Open to any friendly amendments or
Any
changes.
debate? Oh. Councillor Wilson. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I'm supportive of both parts of the motion. My question to Mr. Gibbon is whether committee can establish the date, time, and location of the public hearing, or whether that is better done by council. So a recommendation today to council to establish that date next week. And it's a small matter, but procedurally, if we're going to a public hearing, it seems to me, and I haven't looked, it only occurred to me now, but it's probably council has that obligation, not committee. So I wonder whether I could encourage the mover of a friendly amendment to say that committee recommend that council establish and do this properly next week.
100%. As you were saying that, I believe that was what I feel to be a good adjustment. As long as Ms. Nadon is clear on that one, I don't have to repeat it. Good.
That committee recommend council established August 15th.
Correct.
Any further debate or questions? Councillor Wilson, I think I interrupted you.
No, I'm just on here to vote.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. I would say that we should take a 10-minute break at this point and reconvene at 11:45.
And just before we break, I don't know who's left there, but certainly extend thanks and appreciation to our guests who indulged us with so many questions for such a long period of time this morning. Oh, they're all still there. Good. I send my thanks to each of you for that. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor Arling, for catching that. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back. We move now to 7.2, extended producer responsibility. CAO Given, are you available to speak to this?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, I'll just provide a brief introduction. You can see that Director Greathead and I are in the same wood-paneled shed in different parts of Canmore. This report is coming back to council in response to the coming startup of a new system for recycling in the province of Alberta. There is some preparation work that the municipality may need to undertake in order to get ready for that system. Council provided direction to administration to come back with some information on what administration believed would be required. And Director Greathead has those details for you here today. And so I'm going to pass it over to John to do the rest of the report.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Given, and good morning, Deputy Mayor and Council. We first approached this with EPR. We were tasked to come back after a brief description of what we were looking at with the program. As we're understanding now, the program will only cover residential recyclables. It does not cover the industrial, commercial, and institutional sectors. So for us to be able to benefit from joining the EPR program in any way, we will need to segregate the materials. Administration, we took a good deep dive looking into how we could manage this, and what we've come up with is I think that we're going to need to have two different areas. We have some recycling sites throughout the town, mainly by the museum parking lot across from the activity center. That one's used mainly for residential, but we do notice that the volumes of material that we do get into that site is predominantly from the ICI sector. So we're going to have to really work on making sure that we keep these streams separate. Administration is proposing that we had money for a 53-foot enclosed trailer this year for cardboard that we were going to use for storage. We're proposing that we use that money to purchase a new recycling trailer for residential purposes only. So we'd have more smaller openings, a little more restrictive, so that we don't get the large 5-gallon pails and those items going into the stream. And then with the S block parking lot, we would want to, or the S block depot, we would want to make that pretty much just a strictly ICI drop-off area, and then segregate the streams those ways. So the recommendations that we have from council, or have for council this morning, is that we recommend that the purchase of a dedicated residential plastic recycling trailer, and conversion of the activity center parking lot recycling depot to residential use only, and conversion of the S block recycling depot to industrial, commercial, and institutional use only. The alternatives that we see is that council may direct up administration to drop out of the EPR program completely, and continue providing recycling service status quo. That's an option, and we would not need to make any changes to that point, but we would never recover any of the funds that are available through EPR. Council may direct administration to cease collection of commercial cardboard and provide sufficient bins to receive flattened cardboard at the S block parking lot, or S block depot site. And then we're also another alternative too is that council may want to suspend glass recycling and pickup at this point. The glass recycling program, there's not really a stream for recycling at this point. There's no processors available for us to take our plastic, or take our glass to. And seeing as glass is made of sand, it's pretty much inert, and it's not a harmful substance at all. And so we're suggesting just to landfill that at this point. Other than that, the rest of the information is in the report before council. And if there's any questions, I'm available. See if I have any updates for you. I just would like to say that the rollout and the directions we're getting from ARMA, the Alberta Recycling Management Authority, we're still waiting for more information on EPR and how it's going to roll out and how it's going to affect the individual municipalities. The information coming out has been quite slow.
Thank you, Director Greathead, and I'll look to council for questions. So, Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I'm just curious, Mr. Greenhead, what do we do with the gas now that's all being recycled? Does it just go to the waste?
Currently it is. There's no provider for the service to take the glass. We have been collecting it. Unfortunately, that's part of the waste transfer station too, that they have the management of that. So we do collect the materials and put it there, but they've been unsuccessful as well to find a service provider.
Deputy Mayor Waxer, just to add some supplement to that, there are other areas, other municipalities that may communicate to the public that they have glass recycling programs. And just to be clear, we're talking outside of refundable bottles. So we're not talking beer bottles here because there's a whole separate system for that. And so when you take them to the bottle depot, that's something else. What we're to talk about is pickle containers, pickle jars. So in areas where a municipality is communicating that they collect those for recycling, most often they're being collected for reuse or downcycling, and will often be ground up and used for ground cover at a landfill site. So ending up in the same place. Or another one that I've heard of is in some places there may be somebody that's willing to use them as a product for sandblasting. As Director Greathead said, we have had a real challenge sourcing any of those other things. And even in some areas where they say they are recycling, the reality might be a fair bit different from what the public might imagine.
Councillor Demoda.
Well, I appreciate that information. And, you know, when you look at the environmental aspect of it, a lot of people rinse out those containers, those glass jars and stuff, and sometimes even use soap or whatever it is, just so it doesn't like create a smell in your collection area at home and things like that. So, I mean, you know, there's going to be some savings to that if it's just, it's going to the trash anyway. So I'm going to ask some harder questions. What about the other things that we capture, like tin? For an example, we have that disposal, and you know, you see an occasional mountain of that at the transfer station. Is that going anywhere? Are we ended up doing the same thing here?
Deputy Mayor, to respond to that question, Councillor Demoda, the tin, we are able to bail the tin now, so we did request a capital purchase for a baler that we will use specifically for tin. I believe that it's being ordered and sourced right now, and we will be baling tin. We expect to get about $60 per bale profit off of that.
As long as that's getting reused, right? I think that's the whole concept, even if there's a cost to it. And then, you know, it's sad that all that work that, you know, people do to get glass into a certain area. I mean, if it is going to a transfer station or a dump somewhere to line dumps, or, you know, then maybe having that direct process is a lot better than it just ending up randomly in a landfill. But I'd like to see that have some use, but if not, then, you know, our solid waste bins are going to be a little heavier now, I guess. But I guess it's the same.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wexler. I have a question about one of the alternatives regarding ceasing collection of commercial cardboard. That's the cardboard bins in the alleys that municipality picks up, and I'm assuming the businesses that use the service pay a fee for that service.
Deputy Mayor, to speak to Councillor Hall's question, we have recently increased the rates for the commercial sector for recycling, and that's specifically to help address cardboard. It's still a task that it's at least one full-time position, maybe more in the summer, of collecting commercial cardboard. We're suggesting that to streamline the operations and know some efficiencies, that we install some we install a bin or two at the S Block parking lot, and get rid of the commercial cardboard pickup business. I think that there is a private sector availability and support, and I don't know if that's something that we should be continuing on at this point with the commercial cardboard. So we're looking at this as if we're going to have to be making some drastic changes to our recycling system, something that's not happened in Jasper in many years. So this is probably the most opportune time to make these moves.
Thank you, Director Greathead, and Councillor Demoda has a question.
Councillor Hall, were you finished with your line of questioning? Well, I was just, while we're on that note of cardboard, I thought that we just purchased a new vehicle and changed our pickup process to adjust those increased fees and all that as a new service delivery format. And I do have a follow-up question. Is through you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to Mr. Greathead.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Demoda. We did purchase a compacting truck, but that's for household waste, and that's where that truck is being most beneficially used for. And then once we have a truck that's used for the our household solid waste, we would have to really clean that truck out and make sure that it's that there's no material that's going to contaminate the cardboard in there. So our compactor truck is used specifically for they
Right, because once it's soiled, you can't use it. You can't. Okay, so I'm just wondering with all these changes and stuff, is there an opportunity through our business licensing process to have an environmental levy attached to it to some degree where we can recapture or initiate this EPR fee? Is that an opportunity that, you know, we can use that when we review the licensing fees and costs?
I
Thanks,
see.
Mayor Waxer.
Popped up again, so I'll give him the floor.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Waxer. So just to ensure that we're keeping the issues distinct, EPR, the coming change from the province that we need to get ready for, only applies to household waste, household recycling. Does not at all apply to commercial. The implication for Jasper, though, is today we have no separation between commercial and residential, and we need to figure out what's what, right? And that's why Director Greathead has presented this plan of identifying one area as being for residential and managing what's put in there, and creating another area that's specific to commercial to manage what's in there. Because we will need to separate these streams because the producers will have an obligation, and how that obligation will roll out and who will do it is still to be determined, but they will have an obligation only for the residential stream of recycling. Today in Jasper, because of our co-mingled system, we can't highlight what those costs are and differentiate them. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. We've talked about glass, which is an alternative consideration that if we're making changes, as Director Greathead said, maybe now's the time to consider that. But the core purpose here today is what do we need to do to prepare for EPR? And the answer to that is we need to be able to tell the difference between plastics and paper products that come from residential properties and plastics and paper products that come from commercial properties. And that's what the recommendations are focused on. There are these additional recommendations as alternatives that would be supplementary to say, in addition to these changes that are required to adjust to the system, here are some additional things that we can do proactively to refine our services to be more reflective of what the actual market is. So just to make sure that distinction is clear. The ability to add, Councillor Demoted, to your question, the ability to add an environmental levy is something the municipality could do and has no impact on EPR because EPR doesn't deal with the commercial properties where we'd be looking to add that environmental levy. So we can consider whether that's relevant. But EPR is strictly focused on residential properties and residential recycling.
Mayor Ireland.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. I can maybe start with Mr. Gibbons' response, but I have questions through you to Director Greathead. But I did struggle with the request for decision, and in particular the alternatives, because except for the first one, they don't really seem to be alternatives at all. So I just want to clarify from Mr. Gibbons' recent comments that, in fact, those other ones are other recommendations. So they're not specific to separation of the streams, but there are other things that we could be doing, but they're not alternatives to separating the streams. They're just other good ideas. Is that fair? And both the abandoning of recycling of glass and ceasing collection of commercial cardboard, are those both recommended to council in addition to the separation of the two streams?
Your worship, they're not recommended because they would be in the recommended line. They are supplementary things that council may wish to do in addition. Administration's identified those. I don't know that we're fully committed. We appreciate that there is some political sensitivity around the public's perception of particularly glass recycling. And so we're saying, from our perspective, these are things that are worthy of consideration. We appreciate that they may be more hot topics, and our recommendation is focused on the core purpose, which is getting ready for EPR. There's some other things you might want to consider.
All right, thank you for that. Then through you, Deputy Mayor Waxer, to Director Greathead. If the activity center parking lot recycling depot is to be converted to residential use only, is there an opportunity there for yard waste? Yeah. And I could be wrong, but I always do my yard waste over in Block S, which makes it convenient to take my other stuff there at the same time. So would this separate yard waste from other recycling for residents? And could that be accommodated?
Deputy Mayor, to speak to Mayor Ireland's questions, yes, I believe that's a level of service that we could improve upon over at the museum by having yard waste there. We do do it kind of an emergency response too, like we have this last week with all the trees coming down and that. We figured that if we are able to segregate the materials and keep the residential stream over at the activity center, and keep the ICI materials over at S Block, we would actually need quite a bit of a smaller footprint than what we actually are running over at the activity center right now. The bulk of our materials that we receive there is ICI. It's quite a lot of the restaurant kind of sector that we get in the 5-gallon pails and stuff like that from. So having that moved over will make us more adaptable and ready for EPR. One of the statements is you can't manage what you can't measure right now, and without segregating that material, we do not have an accurate handle on how much is residential, how much is commercial, and then we're ultimately, if we're have a lot of contamination with ICI materials into the residential streams, then we're going to be paying penalties on it, and we will not benefit from EPR at all. So that's kind of the most important thing, is that we have to segregate our streams at this point.
And on that point, you've led to my next question, which is that issue of contamination. And so you gave one example, 5-gallon buckets of plastic rather than a little tub of used yogurt or something. So there would be a difference between ICI and residential, but it seems to me that in most cases it will simply be a matter of volume, not the nature of the product. So how does a pro get to determine the level of contamination between, say, ICI materials and residential materials? Suppose businesses start hauling their cardboard to the residential area without some sort of enforcement or supervision. It seems to me that the program is subject to sabotage, and then we are subject to potentially penalties for not policing it. So I know in one part of the request for decision, there is reference to the possibility of having staff hours, but then there's an additional cost as well. So how do we manage contamination, not in terms of the nature of the product, but the volume of the product and who actually brought it to the residential area?
Deputy Mayor, to speak to Mayor Ireland's question, we've considered that. We know that we're going to have increasing controls, and hopefully the message is sent, and we have compliance and adherence to the program as it speaks. But we do think that we're going to have to work on our messaging. We think we're going to have to reduce the size of the opening, so like it's household materials. One of the things that I notice is that I don't know anyone that buys 5-gallon pails worth of feta cheese, but we have those constantly. The ice cream containers, the 5-gallon pails of ice cream. That's what we're seeing in our residential stream right now. So our residential trailer that we pick up, it is usually at least 70% ICI materials, as opposed to what you would see for residents. Same with the cardboard. If we have the cardboard, the volumes of cardboard is significant from the ICI sector, where it is kind of minimal from the household sector. So that's why we figure we would be able to, with increasing bins, improve signage. We may have to have a site that's only open, during certain times, but I don't have the answers to that, and I think that we're going to have to be adaptive and cross those bridges as we see the problems arise.
Additionally, if I may, Deputy Mayor Waxer, costs associated with managing the residential stream are costs that could be passed on to the pros in the future. So that's a part of this, this intent is to say, if we need to put in extra effort in terms of resources and staff or cost to help separate the streams, we should do so now so that we can get a full picture of what those costs are, so that a couple of years down the road, when the system gets kicked off and the producers take on responsibility, we will be able to say, well, here's what it costs in Jasper. And you have a choice, pros, producers, you can either do it yourself, come into Jasper, tell us to stop doing it, and we'll stop, or you can pay us to do the service that we've been doing. And so, but as a foundation, we need to establish that clear understanding of the differentiation and the differentiation between residential and commercial. And so if there are costs, it's likely that those costs associated with extra monitoring of residential would be able to be passed on to the pros in the future.
Thanks.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So speaking of separating, having residential use the activity center parking lot, commercial use the industrial zone, and with Mayor Island talking about yard waste, and just reading in the discussion, there's often a quasi waste transfer station at the recycling or at the activity center parking lot, which I see, and I know that it's not by accident. It's because locals, a lot of residents don't have vehicles or access to our landfill. I would love to see that in some kind of consideration, like a free share shop or a covered zone there for those bigger items. So my question is, when those kind of things get dropped off at that station, are they just collected by municipal employees and taken out to the landfill?
Deputy Mayor Waxer, to Councillor Hall's question, yes, we do not really have a big bulky item pickup. That's not a service that we provide, but when we notice that somebody dumps stuff kind of illegally, we'll see couches outside the tip-off bins and everything like that. We just have to pick it up and make sure that the town's clean and tidy. It ended up being a nuisance. It's not something that we're controlling or able to control really what people do. So we're just reactive on that kind of situation, and we make stuff go away.
I wonder if there was a space for residents to drop things off that could get picked up by other residents, if that would be something that there'd be an appetite for, a consideration for.
I think it's something, but I'm sure that's something we can do. That would be definitely an increased level of service. It's not something that I've contemplated at this moment, or it's not something that's really on the table for today. But we can always adjust their level of services.
That might be the kind of item, if council wanted to get some additional information about what the potential costs of a large pickup service or a large pickup location or large drop-off location, that might be a referral to administration. As Director Greathead said, we don't have that information in hand right now. Anything is possible, and just a direction to administration to bring back information to a future committee meeting or to budget, and then we'd be able to gather some info for you on that topic.
Sorry, one more.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. the vision I see is not a pickup, but a free store. So some kind of covered shelter where people can drop off bigger items that other residents can come and just collect for free. Kind of the reduce, reuse, a few R's in all the R's.
Councillor Demoted.
Yeah, just, I wonder, just from some of the questions, if we have an opportunity here to do some education to the community, because you know, when it comes to soiled products and types of plastics and stuff, we haven't really done a campaign in a while, because I'm pretty sure there's a lot of pizza boxes that show up in you know, the cardboard recycling, and as far as I understand, that they're probably, for the most part, not really recyclable, right? Once they get that cooking oil in there or whatever it is, cheese and all that stuff. It's just, but I don't think a lot of people know that. Same thing with the types of plastics and all that again. And, you know, I'm just wondering, going back to the initial stages of cardboard collection, I think that there was a real opportunity to divert a lot of the cardboard going into the mainstream waste from apartment buildings and stuff, for the simple fact that a lot of people don't have vehicles, and there was a real issue in alleys and stuff, and to the dismay and disgruntlement of some of the businesses that didn't like all those Amazon type boxes going into the commercial bins. It did, I think, create a cleaner environment from what was happening before, and now even more so. What's going to happen with all those boxes when residents, like, I know it's up to somebody that rents an apartment when they get their stuff from wherever they get it delivered from, to take it somewhere. But I think a big advantage to the overall cleanliness in the community is having those commercial bins in the alley. So there definitely has to be some type of campaign to educate our residents.
Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Waxer. Quick question on the current recycling trailer. We indicate here purchasing one to have smaller openings. Could we not convert the current one that we have by adding stainless steel to each of those openings and restricting the size of what can be put in the trailer?
Thank you for that question. I believe that our volume, so we're going to need another plastic recycling trailer over at the S block if we're going to be able to divert the streams. And then we were thinking with it, when we manufacture a second trailer that we would have at the activity center, we would just make it a little more restrictive. So that way we can't have the large 5-gallon pails and stuff thrown in there.
Thank you for that. So we're adding a second trailer and changing the S block recycling to be more, probably easier to empty out those current cages that contain the plastic. Quick question on the cardboard that we're talking about and taking care of residential cardboard only. We would be then removing cardboard recycling in a commercial district and in those areas, or would we be removing the cardboard bins throughout town completely?
I think that if we go to bins only for the commercial cardboard, we would be better off. It would be a lot more efficient than having this service as right now. And then if we just monitor where our streams are. I don't know whether that means whether we have to do some camera work and some enforcement, some education. I do know that there's a few providers that go around and help some of the commercial businesses pick up their and drop it off. What we're going to want to do is those service providers that are picking up at the businesses, just that they're educated and take it to the right stream. So that way we have only our residential at the one site and all of our at the other site. And then we'll be able to have a cleaner system of, quantifying what is our residential recyclables, and then we'll be able to work better with our pros to get financial recovery for our work.
I'm good.
Other questions or comments? I'll take a moment then just to ask, I wasn't entirely clear from your answer if the cardboard bins from the residential in the residential areas would continue to exist or if they would be removed.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, the feed just cut out for me for a second.
Would the cardboard collection bins in the residential areas remain, or would they be removed? And cardboard only at the activity center parking lot?
I believe, Deputy Mayor, that we would have to really take an assessment on where the most efficient use of our bins are. The most efficient placement of the bins are. We're going to have to go in a bit of a deeper dive and make sure that we're working on this. I'm hesitant on offering to, provide more bins when they cost between $7,000 and $9,000 per bin. Just to make sure that the businesses or the users are flattening their cardboard.
Other questions or comments? Would someone like to make a motion? You're out.
I'm almost ready to make a motion, but I need some clarity on that last question from Councillor Waxer. So if there was a supported motion for the conversion of the activity center parking lot recycling depot to residential only, so change what is there to residential only, does that suppose the removal of residentially based cardboard recycling right now?
I'm hesitant to answer that one at this point. I think we would still need to do a proper assessment on where our bin locations are, if we're making effective use out of them, and as long as it's meeting the objectives of segregating the streams, that's really what my goal would be.
Yeah, Your Worship. So no, I don't. I don't think that the conversion of the activity center parking lot to being residential use only presupposes that we would remove cardboard recycling from other areas of town. It is unlikely that a business downtown with a high volume of cardboard is driving over to Cabin Creek and depositing their cardboard in the bins over there. So we can, I think we can, and more investigation is needed, because I won't say that it doesn't happen at all. It's possible. But no, the intent of this motion is not to remove any existing recycling facilities from residential areas of town. It is only to start the process of ensuring that that area where we do the major collection of things like plastics and paper, that we can manage the types of users that are coming in there. So it doesn't imagine removing any recycling from other areas of town.
Thank you for that. On that basis, I am prepared to put forward a motion that committee approve the EPR preparation plan as proposed, including the purchase of a dedicated residential plastics recycling trailer, the conversion of the activity center parking lot recycling depot to residential use only, and the conversion of the S Block Recycling Depot to industrial, commercial, and institutional use only.
Any debate? Councillor Melnick.
And not really a debate, but I'm gonna suggest a comment that, you know, what we're voting on is to convert and get ready for the EPR, but I certainly would not like to see us stop collecting commercial cardboard. I think we need to work with our commercial sector in making it as easy as possible to do business in the community. And if it means that, you know, we need to provide a service to help that separation of that stream, it'll probably help us in the long run to be able to recover the cost of the residential. I think if we were to cease the commercial collection of cardboard, we may see a creeping in of cardboard being deposited elsewhere, which would defeat the purpose of what we're doing. We certainly need to help our visitors as much as possible to be as efficient as possible.
Any other debate? Comments? Well, Councillor Demoda.
Yeah, just for some clarity here, like if that switch is going to be made, what's the actual intended date through you to Mr. Reid and through you, Deputy Mayor Waxman? April 2025, is that what we have in front of us?
I think that everything by April 2025, everything's going to be fully rolled out, and that there will have to be a similar recycling service as we have for solid waste services through for all the members of our community, through all communities that are going through with the EPR program. So if it has residential solid waste pickup, they're going to have residential solid waste pickup for recyclables as well. So that's where it's ultimately going. There's going to be some phase-in steps, and I think that once we start, there's going to be a lot of communications pieces to this to make sure that we're getting our community to do what we need them to do. So there's going to be that educational and the informative pieces of this. I think that council supports the request for the trailer, we can get into that and make that purchase right away and start having that made for us. And we'll start working on the segregating the streams as quickly as possible, revamp the activity center, the layout of the activity center depot and the S Block depots.
Councillor Demoda.
So just to finish up on that, I don't know if I can make a recommendation today, right now, based on the information I have. If cardboard was a profitable thing, like I say with other things, and for the private sector, somebody would be taking a crack at it, I guess. You know, and if you were going to go into business to recoup used cardboard, you know, how do you make money off of that once you recoup it? I mean, we have the plastic recycling for bottles and beverage containers in the community that seems to work as a business model for somebody to collect that and recoup some money on it. So I think a drastic change going from what we're doing right now would definitely impact on way businesses work, and that has an impact on staffing, other requirements that you're going to have to need to move all that. And I don't know if every business in the community that's using the cardboard recycling can adapt that quickly. We'll have to see, but I don't have enough information to support that motion right now.
For clarity, there is no such motion. The motion is to separate the streams. Use the activity center parking lot for residential, S Block for industrial, commercial, and what is institutional. I specifically did not include any part of that motion to talk about ceasing collection. It's just separating the streams so we can get ready for EPR when it comes, and it's coming. You asked a legitimate question, how long will the conversion take? There's going to be some communication requirements, maybe some signage. It will take what it takes, but I would expect it would happen fairly quickly, but it's not going to change service levels in the community, including what we are now doing is collecting commercial cardboard, and there's no suggestion that that is going to change in the short term. Something that should come back, but again, it's identified as a consideration for council, but it's not even recommended by administration right now. They know it's a problem, but they haven't recommended that we cease. And so it's not part of the motion that you're asked to vote on today.
Thanks for that clarity. I didn't know I was the only one that was unclear on that. Did get another question on that prior to me saying something. So, yeah, and it would be nice if we had a recommendation, alternatives that maybe encouraged, but we can't have that because that delves into the political conversation. But I know that that might be encouraged down the road, and that has been suggested. So I could support these motions if that is the intention. So thank you.
Are there any other questions, any debate? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carried. We go now then on to the motion action list. Thank you, Director Greathead, for your information. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
On to the motion action list, and CAO Given, have you got something you would like to say to that?
No, I was just gonna very briefly, I know we're getting into the lunch hour, identify a couple that administration believes could be removed, and then you'll see some items that are recommended to be deferred. Those are just recognition of current staff workload and prioritization. But the JCHC governance item, that was delivered today. Council has given additional direction, so the new direction will come on, and I believe that that item under JCHC governance from January 10th could be removed. Similarly, Director Greathead's report addressed the extended producer responsibility item from May 23rd. That's been delivered, and there, of course, was additional work that's coming out of the motion today, but both of those two items could come off, and you'll see the other recommended status changes in the table that's there.
Any questions, concerns? If not, is there a councillor willing to make a motion that we approve the updated motion action list? Councillor Keller-Hampy. All in favor? Motion carried. Moving on then to councillor upcoming meetings. Councillor Melnick.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wax. I'll just report that last Thursday I attended the annual general meeting of Community Futures West Yellowhead via Zoom. And the committee now, our Community Futures meetings are now pretty well finished until this September.
Any other updates? Okay. Then we'll move on then to upcoming events. Any additions to what's listed? Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Canada Day pancake breakfast, and then directly after the breakfast at 11 a.m. there'll be a flag raising ceremony at the Legion, followed by the parade at 1 p.m. Moving on to the party in the park, which will be in Commemoration Park from 3 till 9, with great local music, kids events, bouncy castles, beer gardens, food trucks, good times. And I'm not sure if anyone yet has asked Mayor Ireland to do a speech at the flag raising ceremony, but I'm hoping he's got a few stashes around pockets.
I hope to see everyone at that event. I believe now that we would move to our in-camera session. Sorry, Councillor Demorton.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna suggest, because this might take a little bit of time, that we break for lunch, and I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity, if we were gonna meet in the adjoining room afterwards, for this in camera, and have the ability for somehow have Councillor Wilson join in if he can, that way. Okay, I just thought I'd ask. So I think just because of the gravity of what we're discussing, it might be better to do it more privately. Lock doors.
Well, let's chat over here.
And I would think from the first item on the in-camera session, there will be no, that it would be unlikely to revert back to a regular meeting. And Mayor Ireland, on the second item, is there any reason we would have come back into session afterwards?
No, I can see no prospect of a council decision being required after we revert to open meeting. It will just be for adjournment.
Okay. So just for those who are listening, that it would be unnecessary, that this would conclude the public part of today's meeting. And is there a councillor willing to make that motion in camera? Thank you. Councillor Keller MP, all in favor? Motion carried. Thank you all for listening in, and we'll make arrangements now for the next steps. Thank you, CAO Given.